So I have my two versions of the quilt that I am working on, and one is the Christmas version with just thatched colors, and one is with the dark background with the Forest Frolic. And so for this, I've gone ahead, I've taken my two pieces that I'm using, which are my B and F pieces, and since I'm doing this dark version, my F is different, no, my B is different than the one in the pattern. I've sewn my two pieces together, and I've pressed my seam open in the back. Then when I'm adding my square on top of the background rectangle, I am going from corner to corner, and I'm sewing right over the seam, and I'm doing an extra seam so that once these are larger triangles, so then once I go to cut it off, I'm going to have the extra half square triangles. And the other thing I talked about last week is that when I'm adding my squares to the pieces, I don't want to start adding it on this end. I want to start adding it over on this end. If you can see here, I want to go in from the side this way, not this way, because when I start and I'm going over this seam right away, sometimes it gets caught in the machine. So I always try to start on the side that is just plain fabric with no seam in it, if that makes sense. Oh, there we go. All right, so when I've done my two lines, I do the other one a half an inch away. I'm going to cut that off, and now I've got my extra half square triangle for other projects that I put aside. And just like a flying geese unit, I'm going to go ahead and press that open. Well, I'm pressing it to the side, but I am opening this up before I add the other side. And I've done that mistake a lot of times with flying geese where I get really excited and I add the second piece on before I've flipped the other one, the first one, and pressed it down. So I really try to make sure that I remember. There's so many mistakes that, you know, we make, and sometimes you think, shouldn't I have learned this one by now? But we just keep making the same mistake over and over. And it's extra sewing to put this other seam in. However, I really like being able to just get the extra half square triangles out of here. And I do find when I'm doing other sewing projects, if I'm making scrappy quilts, I am constantly going to my little bucket of half square triangles and pulling ones out. Now next week, since it's the acorn leaves, the aspen leaves as well, but it's the corner. The difference is just that you've got this little corner dot with some stems, and it's really about also logically following the order that you've been told to sew things and join them in so that it joins correctly. And when I had first talked about this kind of being like a puzzle, that's sort of how I think of it, is that sometimes you've really got to join the pieces in the correct order. Otherwise you get into doing partial seams, and I'm not a big fan of doing partial seams. I don't think I really know anybody who is. Actually, I need to go to my little bin of the pieces that I have cut, and I'm going to look for my 2-inch pieces. Here's my 2-inch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. There we go. And these get added to the bottom. Now, I had noticed a comment on Facebook where someone was saying they were enjoying not having to match seams. This is a very forgiving pattern because you don't have to match a lot of seams. And so because of that, when it also comes to adding these little like rounded corners on things, I know with the trio, some of the pieces are cut to like 1/8 of an inch, an eighth measurement. If you don't like going to 1/8, you can just round it up and go to 1/4 of an inch, because it's just rounding off the bottom of the leaf. And so my measurement is for what I thought would look good to round it off, but it's not matching another seam. So you can like make that a little bit more or less. It's just that I thought the look of it was good with that measurement. But it is very forgiving that way. And I really enjoy sewing some things where I don't have to pay attention to the precision with the seams quite as much. I mean, that's good to do too, but to me this is just a little more fun to kind of just let it go and sew. And my other corner. On these 2-inch pieces that I'm putting on, I'm not saving the corners on these. I think for me, about 2.5 inches on a square is usually about the size that I will save. If I were to cut these off, just to show you, this would be a fairly small half square triangle. That would be that big. Which, if I measure it, this is 1 inch and 3/8. So I could use this. I have projects where I have pieces that are, 1 inch and 1/4, and it's a 3/4 of an inch finished half square triangle. I don't do a lot with that. So for me, I usually don't save a piece this small. It can be used, it's really great on tiny projects like little pin cushions and things, but usually the cutoff for me is about 2.5 inches for when I'm gonna go ahead and like save that piece. So I've added my end pieces here. And I went ahead earlier, I made my stems. That was just simple sewing end to end. I also did a test with these. One of them I pressed open on the back, the other one I pressed from the middle out. I do feel the one that I pressed open lays a tiny bit flatter, but not by much. And I don't think it would make any difference on the long arm or when I'm quilting it in terms of open or to a side on this. I'm gonna make a decision sometimes with this if I have white in a dark fabric and I don't want to see something folded over on the white, that might influence me. I do think the pressed open's a little bit flatter to the front, but it's such a minimal difference that I don't really think it makes a difference at all which one you do on this. It makes a difference to me to press it open on this back seam to get that to lie flat at the top. It's a common question about pressing seams, and to me it's always a case-by-case basis of what's going on with the fabrics and all of the piecing. All right, there's my big aspen leaf. All right, pretty simple. So I did go ahead and I worked on some of these pieces for my Christmas version that I'm doing. Since this is going to have a lot of whites and washed linen in it, I'm only doing a couple of the leaves where I'm going to have like green as an accent, and this happens to be one of the accent leaves. So for this, as I'm working along, I do like to lay out my pieces as I'm working, and I cut these from the strips because I'm cutting as I go for the Christmas one. I've just made my width of fabric strips in the sizes I need. So today, this morning, I cut off, I need 2.5 inch, how many squares? And I just cut them off the strips. As I'm joining things, I like to lay it out on the board. Somebody asked last week about my boards, and this was from Tammy Vonderschmidt and Dawn Cornell. Thank you. This was a gift from them. It has my name up at the top, done with little Scrabble squares. And what's super cool about this board is that on this side it's white, but on the back side it's black. So if I had a lot of white pieces, I could flip this over and use the back side and have all my pieces show up. So it's also a really nice size for laying out blocks like this. So as I'm going along, I'm doing my patchwork, just straight piecing for the stems. I'm doing the exact same thing where I'm joining my 2 rectangles together. I'm pressing my seam open, just like a flying geese unit. I'm pressing, 1 I'm sewing one corner on, pressing it open, then I'm sewing the other one on. I'm sewing on my corners. And again, if you want to adjust your size of the corners so you're not cutting to 1/8 of an inch, that's okay. If you are cutting to 1/8 of an inch, I think I brought it up. Yes, it did. I have this one ruler from Creative Grids, which is the Itty Bitty 1/8 Square. This is by Lisa Bonjean at Primitive Gatherings. I'm going to put this against the white so that you can see it. So with this ruler, it marks off all of the 1/8 inch measurements at the top. So I don't have to be counting on my ruler and going across saying, you know, that's 5/8. Here's, you know, it's marking it for me so that I'm easily looking this and saying, where's my 3 and there's 5/8. Where's 3 and 3/8. All of that is marked on the side, really handy. So anytime a pattern has a lot of 1/8 inch measurements in it, I tend to dig out this ruler and use it, and it saves me a lot of counting on the ruler. So I like it for that. So as I'm making these pieces, I've made my sides, right? I'm going to go ahead and cut this one. I'm going to press this open. I'm going to join it with the other background piece. Case like this, when I have the seams on the back, no seam on the other piece, I'm just pressing towards that for it being as flat as possible. All right, and this is now going to go pointing down next to the stem. Press this one open. Okay. This now is going to go, let's see, I'm going to match it up with the one that I made already. So this is to the side. So you can see I'm joining my pieces together so that I can make 2 rows. So I have 1 row, 2 row, then these are going to be joined together in the middle, like so. The only thing that I'm going to watch out for here is that I want my stem to be falling right about where that middle seam is on the leaf, and the same thing here. So I'm just going to be observant as I'm feeding this through the machine and see if I have to do any adjusting. I mentioned, I think the first time or maybe last week, that I'm not a big pinner, so I tend to be more the type of person who just kind of adjusts it as I go along, and that usually works out. Things that I do pin all the time, I pin long sashing, borders, all of those get pinned. They get folded, half points are matched, half points to that. I do pinning on all of those. And here is my finished block. All right,